Thank you, Julie. So I'd like to thank Crispian for coming along today to talk to us about systems that WES have available for managing fire risk in construction sites. As you know, fire remains a major risk in construction, with buildings being incomplete, with high risk activities such as hot works and perhaps higher fire loads in buildings. It's a really important area. I think in some instances we aren't managing it as well as we could be, and I think the likes of this technology can solve some of those problems for us. There has been a couple of high profile cases of late. The one I'm thinking of most recently was probably Penny's or Primark shopping centre up in Northern Ireland, in Belfast. I think about 2 weeks after the building was complete, it was razed to the ground in a fire. So it's a real risk. It's something to keep on top of. And without further ado, I'll let Crispian introduce him and his systems. Thanks, Crispian.
Cheers, Ben. Yes, hi guys. Well, thank you for attending the webinar today. My name is Crispian Robinson. I'm from a company called Ramtech Electronics. Today I'm going to be talking to you about temporary wireless emergency systems in dynamic environments, but I'm going to focus specifically on the construction environment. So without further ado, I will continue. So just a bit of an overview of who we are at Ramtech, our background, what we do and how we operate. We've been, developing wireless emergency systems and infrastructure for around 30 years. We've got products in over 30 countries around the world, with around, I would say, 220 going up to around 300,000, I believe, towards the end of this year, units installed worldwide. Initially, when we developed our first system, we developed it for the leisure environment. So we developed radio frequency technology, sort of like intruder alarms for your caravan parks, this sort of place, your leisure parks. And through the years, we've developed our products and we've innovated and we've focused on different markets. And around sort of 11 years ago, we came up with the world's first fully wireless EN54 certified construction fire alarm system. Around sort of 25% of our workforce is focused on R&D. We're based in Nottingham, actually, in the UK, and all of our products are designed in-house. All of our products are designed and manufactured in Nottingham in the UK. So totally British focused product and innovated for, well, I would say about the last 30 years. So I'm going to go a bit more into detail later on about the problem itself, the product itself, and obviously the issues it addresses. But just to sort of comment on the initial title of the presentation, I mean, I kept it quite broad because I don't want to sort of pen the product into sort of a category and say this is purely a construction focused product, because at the end of the day, there are a lot of different circumstances and situations where you're going to need temporary wireless fire detection and evacuation systems in place. So I'll address that at the start of this presentation, but just to give you a heads up, the focus will be on the construction environment. So of course, yes, I mean, we've got this product installed in around 80% of major construction sites across the UK. I'll go in a little bit about regulations later on, but you can imagine that this is actually mandated in the UK construction environment. So they need to have some kind of evacuation system on site by law. So that's why obviously we've got such a huge market share there. Renovation projects is another really interesting one. Obviously, it's very similar to construction sites, but you can imagine if you've got a sort of unfinished building, an extension next to a finished building, it's going to be really important to have some kind of fire detection or some kind of emergency system that is actually integrated directly to the permanent system in the finished building. More often than not, we see people carrying out construction works on a finished building site, and they have nothing in place to detect the fire or to notify the permanent system that there is a fire. So this is another application where we see our product used very frequently. Another similar application as well is maintenance work. So you can imagine in a finished building, when you're carrying out construction on that finished building, maybe there's an area you're looking to expand, you're basically carrying out works there. You need to isolate the power. So more often than not, the power is isolated in that area where you are doing building works, which consequently means you have absolutely zero fire detection or protection from the permanent system in place. So we see our system used in this application quite often. Heritage buildings is another really great example. I'll go on to a few examples where we've seen heritage fires within construction later on. But you can obviously, I mean, I don't need to sit here and tell you what the monetary loss is of a heritage fire. It's not just monetary, but it's a cultural loss. And quite often within this environment, installing a totally wired system can be very invasive, and it can cause, obviously, you need to drill holes in protected infrastructure, so it might not be appropriate. Vacant buildings again, I mean, we've got a situation where we see quite often there's no detection in place because, you know, there's no people within the building, but the risk is obviously huge. If you've got nobody on site monitoring that building, you've got no permanent system in place, how are you going to know if there's a fire? We see this quite often with vandals, with arson, or with you know, 50, 60, 70-year-old distribution boards, which are tucked away in a vacant building, slowly smouldering, which can obviously cause a significant fire. So how are you going to know about it before it's too late? And quite often these vacant buildings are either heritage listed buildings or they're surrounded by finished infrastructure, which could obviously increase the risk. Something we've seen a lot in the Netherlands at the moment, it's one of the areas that I work in, and we've seen the refugee crisis because of Ukraine. So we've got this huge influx of refugees entering Europe, and in order to accommodate them, we've been working together with governments to provide temporary housing and temporary accommodations. So, for example, in the Netherlands at the moment, I'm working on a project called the Breda Prison, and yeah, I can understand it sounds very, yeah, I mean, you don't want to be putting refugees into prison, but they've obviously repurposed the building to make it very aesthetically pleasing and accommodating. But the situation is they do not have an integrated fire system in place. So we've put a lot of our system across the building to make sure there's a totally wireless integrated system. And we deployed around 650 units in about 2 days. So you can see the advantages compared to a wired system already in these kind of dynamic environments. Temporary structures is another one. For example, your cabins on site, in an industrial plant or on a construction site, very often there's either temporary sort of cabins where you're working, or maybe temporary cabins where you're seeing staff members just have some time to relax. And quite often in industrial sites and construction sites, these areas either only have a little fire angel detection, not an integrated full alarm. So if there is a fire, you're not going to know about it totally on site. So a few other areas I've mentioned already, obviously the industrial plants, we see the WES system, probably about 70% of our business in Germany is in industrial markets, so not actually used within construction. This is because obviously there's a huge risk within that environment, and we've seen the solution used as actually alongside a permanent system. So in Germany, for example, at a bio site, they've got a permanent fixed fired alarm system in place, and we've got a WES system operating in the background. This is just to make sure that if there's any kind of power outage or any kind of issues with power and electricity, they've got a fully integrated battery operated system that's actually working in the background. So they're totally protected whether there's any other issues. Warehouse areas, obviously this area might not be totally covered by a wired system, or you're looking to convert sort of different areas of your property into storage. You can quickly use our system to provide coverage. I know a couple of you are looking after sort of events and sort of festivals, and we've used our system within this environment as well. I mean, we've got call points distributed across sort of tents and areas where you see there's a high risk of electrical infrastructure, which could mean any kind of ignition or fire. We're actually located our system across every shipyard and construction site within the Netherlands in the sort of shipping industry. So we have 100% market share there, where they actually use our system to not only protect the shipyard, but they also use it to protect the ships that they're working on. So they basically put a magnet on the back of our product, and they just clip it on when they're working. Obviously, there's a huge risk of fire for a 300 to 400 million pound ship. This is obviously a huge risk. Hospitals, we're on the National Children's Hospital in Dublin. I know most of you are from working in Ireland. This is a project I've just come back from a few weeks ago. They were having a significant amount of arson attacks. So just to give you a bit of insight, we've got BAM operating that project. We have around 250 units on site there, and they came to us with a problem. They have essentially an annoyed contractor on site, who's trying to delay the projects and cause issues by setting fires on site. So there's actually a wanted poster on the site with a $10,000 reward. So if any of you have any leads, just let me know after the meeting and we can split the reward. But just to give you an insight into why they went for our system, is basically that they kept having these sort of false alarm arson fires. I mean, they are fires, but they're very small, and they had to evacuate the entire 1.5 billion euro project every time. So they've told me, actually given me a bit of an insight into the cost so far that it's caused them. So they're looking at around 1.2 million euros in lost labour fees, purely down to fire evacuations. So we basically installed our system on the site, meaning they can react to the situation straight away. They can locate the exact area of the fire, and we've got this feature called the inspection delay on our system, which means they can then, as soon as there's an activation, there isn't a full-scale evac. There's basically a 10-minute delay where they can send HSE officers or security to the area, investigate if it is a serious fire, and then after 10 minutes you'll get a full-scale evacuation. So obviously that saves them a lot of money. So these are just the different environments you could use WES in. We've got these in campsites and leisure parks as well. But I'm going to focus more on construction because that's obviously what the product was designed for. That's what I'm sure most of you, the areas most of you are working in at the moment. So I'm just going to go to the next slide. So we've got an overview here of why WES was created. So we were actually approached around 11 years ago by a number of construction firms, Kia, Mace, as well as a number of insurers, Allianz, and they came to us with a problem that the construction industry has been facing. So we know around 26 to 28% of all losses within construction is caused by fire, and we know that it's one of the leading issues within construction. What we've seen, though, is a lack of solutions in place. We've seen a lack of innovation in place to address this risk, and we're seeing the risk increase as obviously time goes on. As you get more contractors on site, we're seeing obviously more and more subcontractors on site with less knowledge of the evacuation protocols, of less knowledge and communication of what they're doing with hot works, and of course all these different contractors running around each other and causing issues. So we see around, I believe it's 15 fires a day in construction in the US alone. So it's a very frequent common occurrence. And what we're looking at here, so we've got basically just an overview of the rationale of why we created this system. So you can see here, we've got the start of the project. So we've got along the bottom, the project phase, and then along the top, we've got the hazard of fire risk. So you can see at the very start, obviously low risk of fire at the very start of the project because you're literally just digging the earth. But as the project goes on, obviously the risk increases. You've got obviously more ignition materials. You've obviously got a huge risk of loss as you get further and further close to completion. But the hazard of fire also increases. You've obviously got those pressures to meet the deadline. You've obviously got lots of subcontractors, running around each other, maybe 40, 50 different contractors all operating in the same space, can get in each other's way. And so obviously as time goes on, as you get closer to completion, we see the risk of fire increasing, as you can see along this graph here. This is for a new build project. And you can see over here, this is the risk for a maintenance refurb project. And as you can see, obviously at the start of the project, the risk is already very significant. So you've got obviously, a finished infrastructure environment where you've got lots of ignition materials and lots of obviously risk as well in terms of infrastructure and monetary value that you could lose. So we know this has been an issue for hundreds of years within construction, but we haven't innovated or developed technology that obviously mitigates this risk. I mean, I'm sure a lot of you at the moment, I know across Europe, in Ireland, and across sort of other regions in the US, for example, the only technology they're using or have been using in terms of evacuation, in terms of fire detection within the construction environment is a sounder, i.e. a klaxon or an air horn. This has been the same for around 100 years. So if the risk of fire has increased, if the risk of fire within the construction environment is more than finished building, why are we not putting in regulations in place, and why are we not introducing technology as standard that actually mitigates this risk and reduces the chances of there being obviously a full site fire or at worst loss of life? So that's a few questions to think about, and that's exactly why Allianz, Kia, these other construction firms came to us with this problem, and they asked us to develop a system that would solve these issues. So I'm going to go into a bit more details about the system later on, a bit more specifics of it, but you can see this is a few points I've already covered and discussed already. So we've got, obviously, let's think about the construction environment, let's think about the risk. So you've got, various ignition sources on site, more so than you would have in a finished building. So let's imagine you've got hot works, for example. This is obviously the most obvious risk. You've got, imagine a situation where you're doing some hot works, you're working, but there's maybe some smouldering that you haven't acknowledged. Maybe 4 or 5 hours later, that smouldering increases, and then you have an ignition. This may happen at 3, 4, 5 a.m. on site, and there's nobody on site to actually raise the alarm. So, this can happen. This is one of the most common causes we see for fires. Another really common cause is, arson. You've got workers on site who are smoking, or you've got, obviously, like with the National Children's Hospital, contractors who are unhappy. So there's a huge risk from that side as well. But you've got, vehicles, you've got machinery, you've got fuel, you've got exposed electrical installations, you've got, one of the most common ones we see in Eastern Europe and Germany during winter is you've got this heating. So you've got a timber frame, and you've got these, winter heaters that look like basically jets firing out, heat and fire. So you've got so many sort of risks in terms of ignition. And then you've got, obviously, combustible materials. So you've got discarded packaging, you've got rubbish, cables, gas cylinders, etc., etc. So all of this is a cocktail and a recipe for fire. And like I mentioned, pressure for deadlines, and obviously many subcontractors from different industries all running around each other at the same time. So, God forbid, once there is a fire, well, why is it more of a risk on a construction environment than it is in a finished building? Well, let's think about what you have in a finished building. You have structured fire protection in place. You've got fire guards, fire walls. In an unfinished construction project, you have none of these. You have no firewalls, no fire doors. They're not installed. So what does that mean if there is a fire? Well, that means the fire will spread far more quickly, and it will accelerate far more quickly in terms of the size of it, because it's got a lot of oxygen just being pumped into the infrastructure. There's no permanent fire alarm system in place at all. So how are you going to know about that if there is a fire? Like I mentioned, you've got klaxons or sounders, or people with an air horn notifying you there's a fire. Okay, that's very well. Maybe you'll hear it if you're on the 2nd or 3rd floor. Let's think about a situation. If you've got someone doing, let's say, hot works on the 4th floor, and you've got people working on the 15th floor. If there is a fire on the hot works on the 4th floor, how are the people on the top floor going to know about it? How are they going to know that there is the need to evacuate? And obviously, in a situation like that, time is valuable. So, you can imagine how that situation could escalate, and how, these people on the other floors would not know about it in time, and then they wouldn't be able to evacuate quickly or even at all. So very significant risk from that side of things. Again, lack of infrastructure means the smoke's going to spread even quicker than a finished building, which means obviously those workers who are on the higher floors coming down the stairs, it's going to be even harder for them to evacuate. And obviously toxic gases, smoke is is more of a leading cause for death than the actual fire itself. So huge issues from that side. Again, just sort of mentioning the environment itself. Obviously, you've got construction works, high noise, constant changing in the escape routes. You can imagine, obviously, building materials or machinery obstructing those escape routes. So again, really difficult conditions. And then once the firemen do arrive, well, what are they going to do? 9 times out of 10, especially if it's an unfinished building, they're just going to let it burn. If there's nobody in there, they're just going to leave it and say, okay, we're not going to risk the lives of our firemen to save an infrastructure project. When they do get there, is there access to water supply, reliable water supply? These are all questions you've got to be thinking about as an HSC risk manager. So, let's look at what happens then, as a result of a fire. What are the consequences to you? What are the consequences to the company, to the contractor? Well, we all know that as a main contractor, you are liable in terms of any kind of fire. So you've got to obviously put some kind of mitigation in place. If there was, God forbid, a fire, the worst thing that can happen, well, deaths, fatalities, injuries to staff, all of the above. And what is the process of the insurers when there is an injury or fatality? They're going to look at the risk mitigation put in place, and they're going to see and assess whether it is adequate. As an HSE manager, that comes on your desk. So you could be individually prosecuted if someone was to lose their life on one of your sites. This is something health and safety directors have to really consider themselves as well. So that's the ultimate risk, of course, and this is something we never ever want to see within construction, but sadly accidents do happen. But let's look at the monetary side of things. So if there is a fire on site, will there be project delay penalties? Yes, I'm sure there is. In every contract, there is delay penalties. So can you afford there to be a process where they have to, put out the fire and then rebuild the infrastructure that was destroyed? That could lead to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 months of delays within the project. So you've got obviously the financial implication of that, and then obviously the financial costs if they're, of the new infrastructure you have to develop. Is the building a heritage structure? Is there significant interest in the building? That's something you cannot replace no matter what. So I'll talk about a couple of heritage building construction project fires later in this presentation, but this is something you cannot replace. Financial losses we've mentioned, the assets, the equipment, and what will the insurance cover? How will they cover it? How will you be protected? I'll go into the insurance angle a little bit later on, but just to be aware, I'm sure you guys know how insurers do pay out their premiums. So essentially, when there is a fire on site, they'll look at what happened, they'll assess it, and they'll go through and take 100% of the claim, and they'll chip away at it. So they'll look at, okay, was there any risk mitigation put in place? If there was, okay, you're more likely to get more percentage of your claim. And they'll just go at it like that, and then the chances are you will not get a full payout or a full claim. But if you were to use risk mitigation technology, something like a permanent detection system or wireless temporary detection system, then the chances are you will have a significant payout and you will be covered. If there is a fire within one of your sites, what's the damage to the brand? What is the publicity you're going to get from there being a fire? You'll definitely be in the headlines. And it's not good publicity. So an early warning system is essentially crucial to not only save lives, not only evacuate the building as quickly as possible, but it means you can protect the surrounding infrastructure, you can protect the project, and you can reduce the risk of any kind of financial losses. Around 80% of companies who do suffer a serious fire are able to recover. So if there is a huge serious fire on site and your insurance do not pay out, this could be goodbye for the construction firm. So here's a couple of case studies I'm going to talk about. I mean, this is one of the most serious ones, and I bring this one up, for a few reasons. So I'm sure you're all aware of this one. This is one of the most famous buildings in the world, and a couple of years ago we saw that they were undertaking renovation works on the Notre Dame site, and sadly there was a fire, and sadly they lost a significant part of the spire and the structure. The cause is yet to be determined. They're still figuring out and analysing the information, but what we do know is the damage caused. So, £300 to £500 million in losses, but you cannot put a financial value on losing, timber trees which were over 700, 800, 900 years old. This is something that cannot be replaced, and this is as a direct result of a construction fire. They don't know the exact cause yet, but they know it was as a result of the renovation works, whether it be an electrical installation of technology they were using, or whether it be they think maybe it was a construction lift that they installed, or they think maybe it could have been hot works. So this is irreplaceable infrastructure that they've raised billions of euros to replace, but again, this is something you really cannot replace. So this is what I would say is one of the most high-profile heritage construction fires we've ever seen. And the most ironic thing is, I don't feel proud about this because at the end of the day, the fires happen, but we have one of our WES representatives meet with their HSE manager on site around 4 to 5 weeks before the fire. And they said to us, no, I do not need a temporary wireless system at all. We do not get construction fires. And look what happened. Here's an interesting one. Again, I've picked a heritage building purely down to the fact, it's irreplaceable and the damages are so hard to quantify. So I don't know if any of you are aware of this one, but it's the Glasgow School of Art. So this is an interesting one because there were in fact 2 fires. So what this suggests is that people aren't even learning their lessons after having a significant fire, which has caused significant loss. So on the 23rd of May 2014, we saw the first fire. This happened around 12:30 in the afternoon. Many students were preparing their artwork for their graduation. Nearly all the students lost their work, irreplaceable art, which you cannot replace. And it took firefighters a couple of days to even put the blaze out, and they were really focused on trying to save as much infrastructure as possible. They saved around 70% of the contents of the building, and around 90% of the structure was still viable. So obviously significant losses, but not the end of the world. They could still replace it. However, it was confirmed 25th of May that the library, the Charles Rennie Mackintosh building, was actually totally destroyed. And this is one of the prime examples globally in the world of art nouveau. So this is irreplaceable infrastructure gone forever. On the 18th of June, there was a sort of star-studded campaign to raise money for the Mackintosh building to obviously replace the infrastructure. You actually had Leonardo DiCaprio, you had Brad Pitt, Peter Capaldi, all basically lobbying to get funding to support this project, and around sort of £35 million was raised, so not an insignificant amount whatsoever. So they've investigated the cause. They came to a conclusion around November 2014, and they found it to be actually insulation that was ignited by a student using a projector for one of their exhibitions. So they believe insulation foam was ignited by a projector, causing the initial fire. So not technically a construction fire, but what we'll see later on is that they had to do restoration works. So around 21st of April 2016, they agreed that they're going to not only repair what was lost, but they're going to significantly expand the university. So they announced a £32 million package where they will begin construction works, and they will obviously restore what was lost and expand the university. Kia was awarded the contract. They spent a significant amount of time developing obviously an aesthetically pleasing option, and obviously developing it in line with the heritage infrastructure. And yeah, they developed a full-size prototype. The construction began around 2017, September, I believe it was. But shortly after construction began, what did we see? Well, we saw, sadly, another fire, and this time it was even more significant. So this second fire was actually as a direct result of construction works on site. They don't know, and they don't think they'll ever know because of the amount of damage, what the specific cause was. But normally they say it was down to most likely hot works or some kind of activity around that. So you can imagine a situation where they've lost a significant amount of this heritage building, and then they go to restore it, but during the construction of this project, there's actually another fire, and they've destroyed, a significant amount of the building. I believe causing around over £100 million of damages, irreplaceable damage, and just shows to us we're not learning the lessons of previous situations. I'm not really going to go into detail with either of these case studies. I mean, it's something I can maybe speak to you guys in another meeting, but it's just another couple of examples of construction-related fires. We've got the Dubai Mall. Luckily, there were no injuries, but they lost, a huge amount of that project. We've got the Maison de la Radio. So I'm not going to go into detail with these ones, but I just wanted to highlight a couple of significant heritage issues. So yeah, just sort of going back on regulation and insurance. So yes, of course, in the UK, it's actually mandated that you need some kind of wireless or some kind of evacuation detection system on site. So that's why we're on around 70 to 80% of UK major construction projects. So if any of you have done work in the UK, which I'm sure you have done, you can find our systems out on a huge amount of the site. So we actually work directly with insurers. So part of my role is to meet with insurers in different regions, to educate them obviously about the risk, which I'm sure they're all aware of, but to educate them that there are systems in place and there are things that you can do to obviously mitigate that significant risk. So what we see in Ireland specifically is You've obviously got HSA operating in Ireland, and then you've got HSE operating in the UK. And the reality is the large majority of insurers that are insuring Irish projects are actually based in the UK. So a lot of them actually do look at HSE legislation. They do look at what's being applied to their UK construction projects. And there's this mentality of expecting this in Ireland as well. It's not mandated. So in Ireland, it isn't within law that you have to have a detection system on site on a construction project, but there is obviously workplace legislation saying you need some kind of system that's fit for purpose to notify people that there is a fire. I would say it can be very much debated that if you're working on a high-rise building or a high-value project or any kind of heritage building or timber structure, that, you know, having an air horn, having a klaxon, is that fit for purpose? Well, that just gives the insurers an extra bit of room to obviously negotiate and to drive down the payout. Like I mentioned earlier as well, the way they process claims is that they look at risk mitigation put in place, they look at the actual risk, and they look at obviously if there's any technology used to help mitigate that. They'll take 100% of the claim and they'll just chip away at it and find issues with the claim till you're left with obviously a significant bill in place. Zurich, for example, we have managed to have an agreement with them where they have this joint code of practice where they actually say that there needs to be an EN54 certified fire system on their site. So if you have any of these insurers, Zurich, Allianz, if you look into the terms of your agreement, there's actually clauses to say that you actually need to have a system like WES on site. So I would very much check who you're insured with, who who your insurer is and what their expectations are, because obviously you may not know about it, but there may be expectations to have that in place. So what is the solution? So brings me very nicely to talk about obviously WES, the product, what it does, and I'm going to go into a bit more focus now on the technical features, the application of the product, and how you can obviously include one of our WES systems on your sites. So we've got the WES 1. This was what I mentioned earlier. We were basically mandated by construction firms, by insurance companies, to develop a system that had 3 key features. So they wanted it to be totally wireless, they wanted it to be totally battery powered, and they wanted it to be durable and designed for the construction environment. So we came up with a system that had 3 years battery life. It was totally radio wireless, and it is obviously very versatile and durable with dust resistant detection, for example, as well as other features which I'll discuss a little bit later on. This was launched in 2009. We then quickly, about 5-6 years later, developed the WES Plus system, because we were getting pushback from insurers saying we actually want this system to be totally EN54 certified. And we did get EN54 certification. There are a number of things that you need to have on your system to make sure it's EN54. I'll list a couple of them. Totally, a backup power supply is one of them. Inspection delay, anti-tamper alert, these sort of things are all sort of mandated. And then in 2017, we came up with the WES 3. So these are all very similar systems, but you can see we've constantly innovated the technology. And with the WES 3, we obviously had EN50 certification, but we wanted to make sure we developed a system that could communicate via the cloud, that could communicate via GSM, SMS, or email. So everybody can be notified through whatever channel that works for them. So just a bit of an overview, a bit of a history on the product and the range. So I'm going to go through each individual unit and product that we have in place, and then the application for it and the reason for having it. So we've got the initial sort of main product that we have is the medical and the fire call point. So we've got call points where essentially you can trigger an alert, a full-scale evacuation. You can trigger the system, and you've got the sounder, 100 decibel sounder included within that unit. You can see there's a sort of break glass on there. It's actually plastic, so you can actually turn a key, and it's not, it's reusable essentially. If you press B on the unit, just around here, you see the medical alert. That will trigger a medical alarm basically. So it will mean there will be an alarm which is separate from the fire alarm, and that will be a sort of short 1 beep sounder to avoid a full-scale evacuation. But because all the system is totally addressable, you will know exactly where that was activated. So we had, for example, Manchester Airport We've got our system deployed there with over 300 units. Someone actually had a heart attack during the construction work. They were able to press the B button, alert the authorities that there was a medical emergency, and within 2 minutes they sent people there and they actually saved that individual's life. This is obviously really useful for a construction environment. We see this used a lot within tunnels as well, where obviously maybe the fire risk isn't that significant, but you can imagine obviously there is obviously still the risk of medical issues. So we've got smoke detection as well. This is one of our best-selling products. We tend to go for smoke detection over heat detection because you can imagine to change the ambient temperature in an exposed construction environment, you're going to need a lot of fire, and by then it's quite often it's too late. So most of our clients use smoke detection, and we've got the standard detector and we've got the dust resistant smoke detector. So I'd say 80% of our sales within smoke detection is dust resistant smoke detector, because you can imagine obviously if you're doing any kind of construction works, there's a lot of dust, a lot of particles. Our system is able to distinguish between all of those particles and know what is and what isn't smoke. So very, very important for a construction environment. It means you can't obviously just put up a fire ranger on site and think that that is okay, because you're just going to keep getting activations, and then obviously when there is a real fire, people are going to be desensitized to that. So this is obviously, I mentioned that just now, we've got heat detectors. This is ideal for extremely dusty environments or more closed environments where you've got maybe finished shell of a building. And we've got the interface. So the interface is a very interesting piece of equipment. This means we can connect to any kind of third-party technology. So we are actually interfacing on construction sites with turnstiles. So if there's an evacuation, we can trigger those turnstiles to unlock. We can also trigger lifts to operate. We can also connect it to a permanent fire panel. And I think that's where the most of the value is really for you guys, because maybe like we've got in the National Children's Hospital in Dublin, you've got a finished hospital next to a construction site hospital. So we can connect to the finished hospital's permanent system via this interface, and then if there is a fire on the construction site, it will trigger the entire hospital, and you're therefore notified as quickly as possible. We can also connect, sorry, just to go back to the interface again, we can also connect to water and leak detection devices. So that's something really, again, huge cause of loss for construction is, leaks and flooding and fire. We can connect to those devices. We can also connect to the gas devices, gas detection as well. Pretty limitless really in terms of what you can and can't connect to. All you need is just basically a volt-free input. So we've got the WES Connect. So normally on site, you're going to need one of these units. So this is the WES Connect. This is basically your fire panel. This is the brains of the system. This is the communication part of the device. So when you're setting up a WES network, you'll go around on site. I've actually gone with me. You'll go around on site and you will connect it to the units you want to set up. One of the biggest advantages of WES is that it can be installed in a matter of seconds. So for example, you can see here, I've got the Connect unit and I've got the fire point here. So if I wanted to set up the network, all I would need to do is switch on the Connect unit, click unit numbering, decide what number I want to name this unit here, maybe 10001, and then I just hold the A button here, and then it'll take a few seconds, and then the light will flash green, and there you have it. You've got a connected infrastructure, totally wireless network. So that's a huge beauty of it, is obviously the versatility and the ability to set up units as quickly as possible. I'll go into a bit more detail about the technicalities of these units later on. And we've also got the link unit. So this is useful for massive projects like National Children's Hospital, where you need to boost the signal. You've got a lot of area to cover. But I'll go into a bit more technicalities of these devices on the next slide. One really interesting feature of the product and system, and I would say it's hugely unique to what we have, is the mobile application that we have. So we've got an app called React, which allows you to basically have as many numbers, as many people connected to the system on site. If there's an activation, everybody's going to know about it through the app on their phone. And basically a map will come up on your phone. You can look at your phone and you'll see basically an arrow pointing on the floor plan of the exact area of activation. So what that means is every single person on site knows exactly where that fire has started or wherever that medical emergency is, and it means you can react and respond to it in a matter of seconds, as opposed to obviously pressing a sounder and an air horn. You have no idea where the fire started, where you've got to evacuate. And there's a lot of other amazing features from the application. You know, you can, as a risk manager, you can take photos of hazards and you can send them to everybody who has the app and identify that. There's basically an audit function, so you can have an Excel log of every single test that was done. You can see when the units were activated, any kind of trigger, and you have an archive of every single unit, whether it has low battery, whether it needs to be maintained, any kind of warning, you've got an archive for that. So as a risk manager, you can imagine it makes your life so much easier when you're doing these site tests, that you have a complete log. You can look at maybe the risk advisors who are carrying out that test, and you can basically see what activity they've done, totally downloadable. Insurers love that part. So this is the range, and I'll just give you a bit of an overview. So 100% wireless, totally mobile system, absolutely no cables, absolutely no permanent power supply required. The system is completely addressable, so you know exactly where which unit's activated, where it has activated. We can zone the system as well via adding multiple base stations, the connect unit, which is the brains. And you've got, with the battery in normal usage, you've got around 3 years battery life. So these units can be used on, you know, on a site for 3 years, and you can obviously know that you're going to get total coverage in that time. You've got some great features where once the battery is starting to get low, you'll be notified at every moment when that battery is starting to need to be replaced. Because of the nature of the system, because of how versatile it is, it means that we've got, you know, some of our Res 1 systems actually still out on site. So these are 7-8 years old. And what they've done is contractors purchase these units outright, and they've just replaced the battery or sent them back to us for a quick cleanup. We send them back, and then they're ready to go on another project. So when you do purchase these units, it's not limited to just the project you're working on. It can be used across multiple sites, across multiple projects. We've got around 900 meters signal range for every unit. And every unit acts as a receiver and a repeater. So what that means is every single unit is a booster, a signal booster. I've been working in the Middle East for Ramtech a couple of years, and I went out to Qatar on a military base. And what I noticed is that we were still getting signal through this absolutely sort of 3, 4, 5 meter thick concrete, which obviously gave me a lot of faith in the system and the strength of the system. It works and operates on a totally encrypted wireless mesh network. So what that means is it operates on 868 radio frequency, but because it's totally encrypted and a mesh wireless network, it means it does not interfere with any other radio technology on site. So we've got these across airports in Schiphol, in Amsterdam, Manchester, all across the world really, where we are operating in high-risk emergency environments where, you know, you cannot interfere with any kind of radio technology. Hospitals as well as another example. So it cannot be hacked into. It's totally encrypted and totally secure. Huge advantage, like I keep mentioning, is just really fast setup of the system. You can have a system set up across your whole site in half a day. You look at a wired system, it's going to take you a couple of weeks, and obviously the installation costs, the wiring, and then removing that system. So really, really fast, easy to use setup. And it gives you obviously that flexibility. It's very compact. All you need to do is, like I said earlier, is just drill, you see on the back here, just 2 screws, and that's all you need to do to set it up. You could even attach a wooden board to the back, have a magnet, and then you can just plug and play on metal walls. We see that across container ships, shipyards, areas like this, where you obviously need to have that flexibility. As the project nears completion, you can imagine obviously more steel structure, more concrete structure is being put into place. Yes, that has the potential to interfere with the signal. That's why we see maybe you need to add a couple of more units here and there to boost that signal. But the beauty of the system is because of the mesh network, they all talk to each other. It's not a linear system. So if one unit is falls out of the network, or you lose it through something, someone knocks it off or destroys it, the system repairs itself. So it will basically look after the network, and it means you've got a fully integrated system without any sort of issues at all. It is totally EN54 compliant. And what does that mean? Well, that means insurers recognize it as a totally EN54 compliant system. So if you were to have a fire on site, If you were to use any other system that's not got EN54 certification, the insurers will not even recognize that as a risk mitigation measure. So you have the beauty of this, it's certified by Intertek, and the insurers do recognize it as a risk mitigating measure. I've already mentioned the anti-blocking technology and the mesh network. So yeah, and again, the security of the network. We actually have a 2-year product warranty as well, which we completely guarantee. So if you have any issues, we'll replace them free of charge. And after, like I said, we've got units that are lasting 6-7 years. We can take the battery and replace that for you for a very low cost. So we've got units like this operating in some of the harshest environments in the world. I've actually done installations in the desert in Qatar, where you've got 50, 60 degrees Celsius, and I've got them installed in other markets which are working in Sweden at the Norfolk Gigafactory, where you're looking at temperatures sub 10, 20 degrees. So we've got IP55 rating, so very durable. We've got dust resistant smoke detection, as I keep mentioning, and it's designed for this kind of harsh, difficult construction environment. What having a system in place like this would mean, it means you have 24/7 detection and protection. So even during those early hours, like I said, you've had someone doing hot works during the day, there's some smoldering, there isn't ignition until 3 AM when you've got maybe one security guy on site. How are you going to know about the fire if there is a fire? So having 24/7 detection is like having someone in every high-risk area, keeping an eye, making sure there is no fire happening. You can interface, like I mentioned, to any other fire system, any other building management system, any other security system on site to give you a fully integrated wireless system. And our system itself, it self-diagnoses itself. So it tests the integrity of the network. And we have this little button in the back, which is called, this one here, which is called the Anti-Tamper. So you've got this unit fixed up on the wall, you're going to know about it. If anyone's messing with it or anyone tries to remove it, you'll get an alarm notifying you of that. So I've mentioned the medical alert, I've mentioned the inspection delay, something that we've got at National Children's Hospital. And yeah, it's just a few examples of how you'd have it on site. You've got obviously the different features, the different products. And what we see quite often as well is these sort of container cabins in the construction environment where they've only really got either just a fire angel, disposable alarm in place, and you've got, electrical heaters. You've got areas where workers are just, relaxing, hanging out. Maybe they're drying their clothes on the heater. In industrial sites, we see this very frequently where they've got an area where workers just relax and hang out in these cabins, and there's no visibility of what's going on in there. So by basically plugging in the WES system within a day, you can connect it to the other systems on site, the permanent system, and you've got coverage, integrated coverage in an area which is temporary. When you remove these cabins, you can just unscrew the system and then put it elsewhere on site. Here's just a few photos and examples of WES within this cabin environment. You can see, yeah, we've got them installed. And here's a few other examples. So I'm going to go through a few examples of installations. So we've got, like I said, we're on 100% of the shipyards across the Netherlands. We're working on shipyards in Italy and Norway, in Sweden and Germany. And what they do is they use the product, they connect it up when they're working on the ship, and they remove it when the ship is completed. So what that means is they've got total protection and coverage during the high-risk construction moments. Here's just a few photos of us on site. I believe this is in Paris. And you can see this is the example I was talking about earlier of being inside the ship. So you can see the ship here, and you can see that we've just basically connected it via a wooden board, and there's a magnet, and you've just clipped it up, and you've got a totally protected system in place. Other major projects include European Central Bank in Frankfurt, Queen Elizabeth Park, West Ham Stadium. We've got Tesla Gigafactory. We've got Apple headquarters. We've got the US Embassy. We've got so many high-value infrastructure projects around the UK and the rest of the world. You can see we've got projects here in Finland, in Bucharest, Vienna, in France. It's just a few to mention. Airports are one of our largest markets as well. Obviously, there's such a huge risk if there is a fire. What are the costs of delays, cancelled flights, loss of infrastructure? So we're across Gatwick, Heathrow, Manchester, Düsseldorf, Berlin, Vienna, Hamburg, the list goes on and on, Schiphol, Amsterdam. And believe it or not, you can use this system within a tunnel environment. So if you've got any construction projects where you do need to do tunnels, our system actually works within that environment. So you would set up the WES network, it would communicate via radio frequency to each other. And if you need to connect it via the cloud or via GSM, we would put units and they'll bounce off each other until you reach the surface, and then until you reach obviously the area where you can get cloud and GSM connectivity. We're on loads of skyscrapers and towers. I'm not going to, just go through listing them all. Like I mentioned, you can see we're on loads of heritage infrastructure projects as well around the world. So if you've got any maintenance, renovation, or construction projects where there is, some kind of protection or some kind of listed building on site where you can't even imagine the consequences of a fire, then I would advise getting some kind of protection or system in place. Industrial applications, like I mentioned at the very start, we've got these used within high-risk environments in industrial centres or industrial plants where they're carrying out chemical works or carrying out maintenance work. They've got a lot of these systems, maybe not even deployed, but then they'll deploy them when they need to isolate power in an area where they've got to do maintenance. And we sell around 80 to 80% of our products in Germany go to industrial applications. So chemical projects, you can imagine nuclear plants as well, this sort of thing. So yeah, I'm going to go through these, and I don't know how we're doing for time. Maybe we've got a few minutes just to talk about a couple of basic installations of what you would need on your construction site. I'll go into it very, very quickly. So just to give you an example, what you would need within your construction environment. So there are no regulations in place for construction environment, but what we tend to go by is BS 5389, so the standard finished build applications. So you've got different options and different levels of protection within that. But ideally, you would want to have at the very basic levels. So I'm going to talk about over here, you can see the early stage. So basically, you've got a construction site here. There is no finished infrastructure. There's no buildings or walls. You've just got a basic plot of land. So what you could use is the WES. We've got the 5-point here where you can connect WES just via a pole, and you've got a smoke detector there, and you've got a cool point. So what we advise at the very early stages is you just have a few of these 5 points around the site. They can be moved about for hot works, this sort of thing, so you can have them on site, and that gives you protection from day one. As the project develops, depending on what your budget is and what level of risk there is in the project, what the value is of the project, who the client is, etc., etc. It depends on what level of protection that you want. So we've got the floor plans here. This is very, very basic protection. This is basically if you've got very low budget but you want some kind of evacuation system in place, this is what you'd go for. So you can see on the floor plans here, we've literally only got detection during across the exits, across the main area. So we haven't got them in individual rooms. We've just got a cool point and a smoke detector with the siren, obviously, across this project. So you can see you've only really got about 8 units, not much at all. And you can see this is what it would look like for a more advanced protection. So you've got the 10.3 radius of protection from the detectors. You can see here we've put detectors in every single room, and we've got cool points across all of the exits. So it's totally up to the client, it's totally up to you about what level of protection that you want, what is affordable, what works, but even just having basic evacuation system in place is better than having absolutely nothing whatsoever. So that is pretty much it. You can see obviously there's a few more examples of temporary accommodation. So yeah, I'd like to open up the floor for any questions you may have or anything I can support you guys with, and thank you for your time.
Thanks, Crispian. That was a really interesting and comprehensive presentation. I don't have a question as yet, but I'm hoping Ben will have some questions. But I've had a comment from Jim to say that they've used the WES system on a large hospital project in Dublin Children's Hospital and found it very good on a site with over 2,000 site operatives, which has an ever-changing environment. This system was ideal. A bit of a training is required, but easily understood.
Yeah, I mean, that's really great to hear. I mean, we went out to visit that project a couple of months ago, and it was really great to see it installed and doing its job. But yeah, that's one of the projects I keep referring to, the National Children's Hospital, and it's been really reassuring. I mean, we've worked with BAM across Europe, across the UK, and it isn't mandated to have this system in place in Europe, but what we're seeing is contractors like BAM, where there is a situation where you cannot even imagine the consequences of having a fire. By having something like this in place, it gives them the opportunity to even communicate to clients and say, look, we're doing everything we can to protect you from any kind of fire risk. But really, really great to hear that we've got a satisfied customer and someone who's actively using the system, because at the end of the day, we designed the system to be totally easy to use, totally sort of self-service, but it does take a training to understand how to navigate. But once you've had that, it's very intuitive, easy to use, and easy to manage system. But yeah, appreciate that. Thank you.
Great. Ben, do you have any questions for Crispian?
Wouldn't be like me. I just a couple of things, Crispian. I got digging just when you were chatting there a little earlier, and just worth mentioning. So I had a look at the construction regulations, and it's quite clear in the construction regs that under fire detection and firefighting, that a contractor responsible for a construction site will, where required, fit fire detectors and alarm systems. It's black and white and it's in there. So I think it's one thing if we're building an extension to somebody's house. Once we get into the sort of projects that everyone in this call is involved in, it's black and white detection systems are required. Similarly, the same regulation sits under general applications for all workplaces. So it's quite clear, it's there, and it's one I think is quite easily overlooked. I would like to tell a little story about training and such systems. I actually had this system on a construction site.
Okay. Well, the Wes.
I was the one installing it.
Oh wow.
And I was trained in the use of it, and of course Ben wasn't listening. I had it installed across a building at this stage. It's probably about 4 or 5 stories tall. I held a fire alarm evacuation test one day, and I had a colleague go up and hit one of the break glass units out on the floor, and nothing happened. And he'd hit another break glass unit out on the floor, and nothing happened. So I went to the control panel in the office, put it into full evac, nothing happened. I rang one of your reps and I tore the head off him. To which I was asked, when you put them up, Ben, did you connect the batteries? Anyway, good talk to you. Have a good day. Bye-bye. But it comes back to testing, yeah. So systems are as good as they're used. So that testing is an important element as well. And these sort of systems, make sure they're working.
Completely agree, and that's when we do have any issues on site, most of the time it's down to the fact that the system hasn't been totally set up correctly or something like this. But yeah, I mean, usually switch it off and on again. I mean, that was what we had with the issues we've connected to the chat earlier today, and I mean, it's a very reliable, easy to use self-service system, and that's the benefit of it. I mean, we design it in a way where people and risk managers can go away from a meeting feeling confident about the system, that they can look after it and maintain it themselves. But we do provide that support, and we put a lot of sort of infrastructure online, how-to tutorials, this sort of thing, where you can understand how to use the system, how to install it, and what the different sort of flashing lights mean, because the system has a lot of features, and it communicates a lot of the time, if not through the smartphone application, but through the number of flashes you're seeing on the outside of the unit. So you can troubleshoot and figure out a lot of anything really with the issues with the system on your own. But I would say, yeah, we've designed it to be incredibly reliable, because obviously it only needs to activate once, and you only need one fire for there to be any kind of consequences. So yeah, no, I really appreciate that. It's great to hear you've been using the Wes system. And did you found it okay to set up after that? I mean, was it
it's very user friendly and very adaptable, can be moved very quickly. It's very robust, because contractors out on site, they kick these things around, don't think too much about them, and it took that bit of abuse easily. And they're bits of kit that have to be paid for, so you want them to be able to take that bit of little bit of punishment. You'd mentioned just a little earlier about a medical emergency. How does the system work into that again?
Yeah, totally. So you've got basically on the call points you see here, you've got the big cross there, to indicate obviously medical emergency. So if you were in a situation where there was some kind of medical emergency required and you didn't want to activate the fire system, you just basically press and hold the B button for 5 seconds. And what this does is it notifies the system that it is a medical alert and it's not a full site evacuation that's required. So what would happen is everybody whose phone is connected to the system via GSM, everybody who has the application, or even everybody on site will know that a medical emergency is happening, because it will sound a beep every sort of intermittently. So it won't be a constant ringing, it'll just be one beep, and you'll know that there is something that needs to be investigated, and people will know that that is a medical emergency, and it won't trigger the actual alarm, and you'll get a notification telling you the exact unit that's been activated. On the phone as well, you'll get a sort of arrow on the floor plans telling you the exact area of where it's been activated and where you need to send the medical team. So again, not just a strictly fire detection product, but a product that focuses on evacuation for emergencies, as well as obviously medical emergencies and medical support. So yeah, a nice extra sort of bit of value there as well.
Yeah, useful for use, very useful bonus on the system. Yeah, very useful. That's good. Any questions coming, Julia? Good.
No, no more questions.
Oh, shy.
That's okay. Not a problem. So some things we do get asked as well. I mean, I didn't cover anything about costs, so maybe I'll just sort of go through. I won't give you the exact cost of the specifics, but you can imagine, for example, so this is the base unit. It costs around £650, and you probably would only need one of those on site, but on the National Children's Hospital we have about 5 to 10. That's because we want to have loads of different zones and different areas, and you've got the call points, which are around £330 as well per unit. So you're looking at a cost of per unit on average around £350. And your typical site, I mean, if you're just looking at, maybe let's talk about you know, a 15-story building where you just want you know, evacuation system. Well, what you'd have in place is on each floor, each staircase, you'd have this call point and sounder. So you're looking at around 10 units of that, maybe 15, sorry. And then if you wanted additional detection as well, maybe one detector on each sort of high risk area. So you're looking at around maybe 30 units on a 15-story building, between 15 and 30 units. So looking at the cost of that, I mean, it's a really minor investment for what you get. And you know, the product itself, like I say, you know, you can use it on other projects. So that investment is not just for that project. I understand maybe it comes out of that budget, but it means you can reuse the technology. And something we do see a lot as well with the larger construction contractors is they basically like to sell the technology in-house and rent it in-house, so you can obviously generate income through that way, and you can obviously manage and maintain the units yourself in that regard. But generally we see most of our clients purchase the units outright, and then we can obviously provide any kind of support services, any kind of you know, battery changes or cleaning up and renovating and repairing the devices as well. We provide all of that as well.
Great, thank you, Crispian. With no more questions, it just leaves me to thank you for a really great presentation this afternoon. I've certainly learned a lot. And thank you for Ben for chairing. And I'd like to thank everyone for attending. And as usual, the video will be uploaded onto the IRSM YouTube channel in the next couple of days. So have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, everybody, for your time. Really appreciate it. And yeah, if you want to get in contact, you can see us at Ramtech Electronics or Wes, and feel free to drop me a LinkedIn request if you'd like to connect. And yeah, thank you to you all for your time. It's very much appreciated.
Cheers. Take care.
Take care. All the best. Thank you.